When giving thought over what should be the subject of my commemorative 25th episode, I frankly gave little thought over which subject I should broach. Not because I was living the dream snorting lines of coke off of stripper booty instead of scripting this episode. Well, not only because. But the choice seemed clear. To celebrate this entry in the mind's eye, it only seemed fitting to discuss my adoration for our favorite genre. What is it that draws me to horror? What is it that keeps me coming back? What is it about them thighs and all them butt cheeks that I can't get enough of? Cinema has undoubtedly enjoyed many a story, many a series throughout its century-plus existence. However, do you realize that Hollywood's very first franchise, ever, was in fact the Universal Monsters? Yes, those same gothic forefathers that popularized horror to the masses. While many a film has come and gone, tried and failed to reach franchise status, it was this series of classic monsters that first popularized fear fiction to the mainstream, cemented Universal Studios as a player in showbiz, and provided Hollywood its first string of bankable movies. The popularity of the Universal Monsters has allowed them to survive through the ages as it inches towards its own 100-year anniversary, which we are, as of this recording, one full decade removed from if you count Dracula as the kickstart. When you reflect on this revelation of film history and movie magic, you hold your head high as a horror fan, remembering your favorite genre's contribution to cinema. Now, if that epiphany doesn't excite your nipples so hard that they can cut glass, bear in mind, I'm just warming up. The right song can vastly impact your mood, whether getting you amped for your workout or allowing you to time travel to your childhood with a throwback track, or
hands on my knees, shaking ass on my thighs. Post me a pic, finna make me a profit. When it hit, then the get toxic. Why the you in the club when niggas wild?
And some songs can provoke you to tear this world asunder and unleash a sulfurous inferno to prematurely jumpstart the rapture. With that in mind, I'd be hard-pressed to name the greatest song of all time, but if you'll join me in a trip down memory lane, I can definitively name-drop the best video to accompany a song, and it's a horror track. How phenomenal is it, fans, that nearly 40 years later, what is still the greatest music video ever is... So iconic is this song that it actually rivals and, dare I say, supplants Toccata and Fugue as the recognized theme song of horror. What's that song, I hear you ask? Whether on the radio, over social media, or shamelessly plugged in to introduce my Halloween coverage despite the prohibitive YouTube algorithm, how great is it that pop culture's unrivaled greatest song footage doubles as the undisputed anthem of the October season? On Mischief Night of 1938, the Columbia Broadcast System aired a radio drama of their anthology series, The Mercury Theater on the Air. The reading for their Halloween episode on this Sunday evening was performed by a renowned actor narrating a famous novel. That actor and future film director went by the name of Orson Welles, and the notable work of literature was none other than H.G. Wells' The War of the Worlds. For the uninformed, the novel was written as invasion fiction, where planet Earth fell prey to a hostile takeover by extraterrestrials from Mars. As the director and narrator, Orson Welles performed the adaptation in a format fitting of your typical evening radio program, only frequently interrupted by a series of news bulletins. Listeners remained affixed to their radios for 60 minutes, fully engaged and attentive to reports of strange activity from the Red Planet, an unidentified flying object touching down on a New Jersey farm, escalating first in scope when Martian heat rays opened fire on the surrounding police and bystanders, then in scope when the military proved powerless to overturn assaults inciting all over the country, until the radio broadcast culminates with a first-person perspective of a survivor coping with the occupation of planet Earth. Now then, despite history disputing and disproving the severity of the ensuing riot, the point is that there were enough people that fully bought into the notion that the world was coming to an end. After all, why would there have been such widespread outrage by the media if the public hadn't taken to some form of hysteria? Now, I'm obviously not advocating for public riots. After all, I'm not a politician tasked with public duty. However, I mention this nearly century-old incident to highlight that even the modern public, far removed from superstition and urban legends, could still buy into a gripping tale of terror by what was considered then the modern campfire in the form of radio. It just goes to show the power that horror still wields. If only either of the film adaptations could have bottled a fraction of that fear factor. On the topic of age-old storytelling, the most time-honored recognizable literature in the world is just as familiar as the origins of horror. When you think about names and novels like the likes of Shakespeare and the Bible have lasted the test of time, you can also add in Frankenstein, Dracula, The Invisible Man, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Not bad company to keep. Hell, let's keep it going. Sleepy Hollow, the works of Edgar Allan Poe, and Faust, that classic story of selling your soul to the hellish bidder. Stretching further back before Gothic literature, even fairy tales have witches, dragons, troll bridges, curses. Oh, if only to return to a time when trolls referred to slobbering monsters under a bridge that eat billy goats instead of sweaty mutants in their mother's basements eating up valuable time writing Twitter rants. Never forget, boys and girls, the Magic Kingdom of Disney built an entire empire off of sanitizing the grim fairy tales, but if you're ever in the mood for a good scare, give a read sometime to the gruesome cover-ups of your favorite storybooks, and you'll find the tales meant to tuck you into bed will instead keep you up at night should you learn their dark truths. Sticking with fairy tales, while Disney gave the white glove treatment to its squeaky clean image of fantasy adaptations, there was one horror icon that managed to slip through the cracks of the Magic Kingdom. Disney's own Maleficent was based on the first pop culture horror host, Vampira.
Really nasty,
So, when you watch Sleeping Beauty or the inferior live-action prequel, remember, had it not been for one of our Scream Queens slipping into the scene, Disney wouldn't have crafted their favorite party crasher.
What an awkward situation.
Let's now have a look at modern fantasy.
I could tell you about Sir Duncan the Tall. Those were always your favourites.
Those weren't my favourites. My favourites were the scary ones.
Oh, my sweet summer child, what do you know about fear? Fear is for the winter, when the snows fall 100 feet deep. Fear is for the long night, when the sun hides for years, and children are born and live and die, all in darkness. That is the time for fear, my little lord, when the white walkers move through the woods. Thousands of years ago, there came a night that lasted a generation. Kings froze to death in their castles, same as the shepherds in their huts. And women smothered their babies rather than see them starve, and wept and felt the tears freeze on their cheeks. So is this the sort of story that you like? In that darkness, the White Walkers came for the first time. They swept through cities and kingdoms, riding their dead horses, hunting with their packs of pale spiders, big as hounds.
What you telling him now?
Only what the little lord wants to hear.
How about that? As much as Game of Thrones is more medieval political drama, the first scene of the first episode of the first season dealt with the build-up of the enemies of the show. I mean, besides the crappy writers. Even Greek mythological tales of heroism need reminding.
For the night is dark and full of terrors.
Deities devouring their own children, women with hair made of snakes and a stare as cold as stone, hounds from hell so ravenous that their appetite can only be satiated with 3 heads for devouring, soothing siren songs to draw sailors to their demise. Then there's the ill-tempered bird women, the blistering and burning sensations they leave behind. All these years later, and science still hasn't found a cure for harpies. The Greek classic The Odyssey even has a section reserved within its pages known as the Nightmare Chapters. Can you think of any other genre of film or literature that comes with a built-in starter kit to get young fans in the door? Think of the dark fantasy stories that we grew up on. The Dark Crystal, Labyrinth, Legend, Willow, Warlock, The Golden Child. Fear fiction, if it wants to, has at its disposal the means not only to appeal to younger viewers, but serve as the welcome mat to usher them in as lifelong fans from childhood. All this and more is why dark fantasy is the gateway genre of horror proper. Circling back to the previously mentioned horror hosts, the 2 most recent iterations to carry the mantle of Vampira are first Elvira in the early 80s, and then the televised Crypt Keeper to close out that decade. These 2 proved that not only could horror movies create classic characters, but that stardom could exist on TV as both have reached iconic status within the genre. Each would start out serving as guides for tales of terror on TV before both would go on to star in 2 movies, making the transition from prime time to silver screen within 7 years. While both used campy humor, innuendo, bad puns.
Hello, darling. It's me, Elvira, Mistress of the Dark, the sassy lassie with the classy chassis. Oh, thanks for bringing me into your home.
Good evening, felons. Time to assume the position, if you know what I mean, and prepare for another assault and battery on your senses. Ow!
How's your head?
I haven't had any complaints yet.
A corpse by any other name would smell as sweet. Unless, of course, it isn't dead yet.
Elvira became a bona fide sex symbol and popular brand, catapulted beyond the genre bubble into mainstream appeal. As sad as it is to think that such an American figure within pop culture such as The Simpsons has fallen out of my regular TV watching for, 2 decades, there is still one trick up their sleeve that always reels me right back in. Their annual holiday tradition isn't 4th of July family drama, a Super Bowl episode, a Christmas caper, or whatever the hell Arbor Day is. Such a tradition is their Halloween episode that no matter how much the show has dropped off, everyone tunes in when the Treehouse of Horror drops. It's undoubtedly part of every horror fan's October ritual. In a time when spectacle and CGI dominates the theater, in a season where bombastic action draws the masses, Have you ever wondered what the debut summer epic was? While you may think a comic book film or war movie, I've got news for you. It wasn't about a superhero or a soldier. No, the first summer blockbuster was a horror movie. Sorry, Star Wars, we got there first. Love you, Batman, got you beat by a decade and a half. This seminal achievement in horror's history and creature feature effects would only be repeated by the film that would ultimately surpass it. 18 years after Jaws took the beaches by storm, Steven Spielberg would return to the director's chair to bring us another horror film, this time 65 million years in the making. Just as Jaws proved a labor of love with animatronics, practical effects puppetry and groundbreaking computer graphics would help resurrect terrible lizards back from the dead. Your scary story can be set in a medieval castle where mad scientists play God, or a suburban haunted house built on Indian burial ground, as low as the ocean floor where creatures dwell, or high in space where no one can hear you scream. The haven that horror calls home can occupy the rustic backwoods or within the recesses of a killer's mind. Your tale of terror can take place in ancient Egypt where idols once ruled, or kids these days at your local school. It can stretch as far back as the Pilgrim-era wilderness of yesteryear, or as far-flung as a galaxy of terror in the world of tomorrow, and any time in between. Your villain can be a towering lizard that breathes fire, or a loving sun that wouldn't hurt a fly. Fear himself can take the form of a bastard son of 100 maniacs stalking your very dreams, or a main course of critters devouring everything in sight. Why, your monster can even be a whole town. The category that fear is filed under can fall into technophobia, classified as psychological thriller, crossover into body horror, extend to J-horror, inhabit our wildest fantasies. This is why genre is in a class all its own. There isn't any other genre that is so spoiled for choice because horror is built off an embarrassment of riches. As we journey forward in the second decade of the 21st century, it has been gratifying to witness the new forms that fear fiction has adorned. Our anxieties surrounding technology have been explored through the shows of Black Mirror, and the power of the internet has been exploited at long last to offer modern contributions. Creepypastas and SCPs give me hope that new strides in the genre can be taken and different methods of storytelling can be innovated to tell these campfire tales. As for you, feel free to take to the comments section to share your love of horror. What got you into scary movies? What's your favorite genre film? As for me, I've been your horror host incarnate, and you'll be seeing more of the mind's eye. Always remember, I'm not a big deal, I'm just the real deal.